Tina. An African beautiful lady falls in love with Utah in an African village. Their love knew no bounds. Utah moved to the city to get a job with the promise that he'd go back and take her to live with him once he secured one. Years passed and Tina didn't hear from him. He later got a mind-blowing job with an oil firm and rented an apartment. He went back to get her after 5 years, but was disappointed as he couldn't find her. He couldn't go to his house in the village as there was no one in there. He was an only child and orphan. Utah stood at the edge of the once familiar village, his heart heavy with anticipation and anxiety. The lush greenery and the gentle hum of the surrounding forest had remained unchanged, yet a cloud of uncertainty loomed over his thoughts. With each step he took, memories of Tina flooded back. Her radiant smile, her infectious laughter, and the deep connection they had shared. He passed by the old market where they used to meet, hoping to recognize a familiar face that could offer information. The bustling atmosphere seemed oblivious to his inner turmoil. As he ventured deeper into the village, his hopes began to wane. He stopped by Tina's family home, which now seemed deserted and forlorn. The walls that once held so many memories felt eerily silent. Desperation clawed at his chest as he asked neighbors and old friends about her whereabouts. Most shrugged, offering vague recollections. Some had moved on, while others seemed to be cautious, either unaware or unwilling to share what they knew. Eventually, Utah found himself sitting on a log near the village's central tree, the one where they had carved their initials so many years ago. He ran his fingers over the rough bark, feeling both the texture of the wood and the weight of his disappointment. The encounter he had envisioned, the joy of their reunion, the laughter, and the shared dreams of the future, now seemed like an elusive fantasy. Just as he was about to give up hope and return to his new life in the city, an elderly woman approached him. Her eyes sparkled with wisdom and kindness as she rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're looking for Tina, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Utah nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. The woman sighed and sat next to him. 5 years is a long time, my son. When you left, she was heartbroken, but life goes on and people adapt. Do you know where she is?" His voice finally broke through, filled with despair and longing. "She left the village shortly after you did," the woman revealed. "She couldn't bear to stay here with all the memories. Last I heard, she moved to a nearby town, started a new life there." Utah felt a mix of relief and heartache. She was alive, but the life they had planned together seemed farther away than ever. "Which town?" he asked, determination replacing his initial despair. The woman gave him the directions, and Utah set off with a renewed sense of purpose. His journey was far from over, but he was willing to do everything in his power to find Tina and rekindle the love they had once shared. Utah left the village with a renewed sense of determination, his heart pulsating with a mix of anxiety and hope. Armed with the directions given by the elderly woman, he embarked on the journey to the nearby town where Tina had supposedly started her new life. As he traveled, the landscapes around him shifted from dense forests to open fields and bustling marketplaces, reflecting the changes that had taken place in both their lives over the past 5 years. The sun was beginning to set when he finally arrived in the town. It was larger and more developed than he had anticipated, filled with the noises and energy of daily life. Hope surged through him as he walked through the streets, asking locals if they knew a woman named Tina who had moved here several years ago. Many shook their heads, while others offered kind but unhelpful advice. Days turned into weeks as he combed the town, turning every corner and knocking on doors. Each time he felt he might be getting closer, he faced yet another dead end. Still, Utah remained resolute, driven by the memory of Tina's laughter and the promises they had made to each other. One foggy morning, he wandered into a small local restaurant. Exhausted and in need of a break, he decided to sit for a while. As he sipped his coffee, He found his mind drifting back to their time together, and a wave of determination flooded through him once more. Just then, he heard a familiar melody playing softly in the background, a song that had been their favorite. He turned to the source of the music and saw a woman standing outside. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He stood up, cautiously walking towards her. The woman turned her head slightly, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. Recognition flared in both their faces. It was Tina. The years hadn't dulled her. "Tina?" Utah's voice was barely above a whisper, laden with emotion. She slowly set down the flowers and looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Utah? Is it really you?" "It's me," he said, closing the distance between them. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I promised I would come back for you, and I meant it." Tina's eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer. "I waited for you for so long, Utah. I thought you had forgotten about me." "Never," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Life took longer than I expected, but I never stopped thinking about you, about us." They stood there, the world around them dissolving into nothing more than a distant hum. It was as if time had paused to allow this moment to stretch on forever. For a while, neither could find the words to express the torrent of emotions coursing through them. "I have so much to tell you," Tina finally said, breaking the silence yet making it richer with the promise of stories yet to be shared. "And I want to hear every word," Utah replied, taking her hands into his. "But most of all, I want you to know that I've come to take you with me. We can start our life together, just like we always dreamed." Tina smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But standing there, holding hands amidst the flowers and coffee, they knew one thing for certain. Their love had withstood the test of time. And now, they had a second chance to create the future they had always dreamed of, together. Utah stood in the bustling cafe, his heart filling with hope and relief as he gazed into the face of the woman he had spent years searching for, the woman he loved more than anything. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, a shadow of sorrow crossed her features, and she gently withdrew her hands from his. "Tina, what's wrong?" he asked, a knot forming in his stomach. Tina glanced around the room as if gathering her thoughts, then took a deep breath. "Utah, you don't understand. There's something you need to know, something very important." He furrowed his brows in concern. "What is it?" Tina hesitated, then began, her voice tinged with sorrow. "After you left for the city, things changed for me here. My parents, they passed away. And before my mother died, she revealed something to me that changed my life. When I was born, my mother had struggled for years to conceive. Out of desperation, she made a pact with the local deity, Chanka. She promised that I would be given back to serve the deity once I reached adulthood." Tina paused to let the weight of her words sink in. Utah's eyes widened with shock and confusion. "Serve the deity? What does that even mean?" "It means," Tina explained, her voice trembling, "that I belong to the local deity now. I live in a small sanctuary, fulfilling the duties required of me as part of the agreement my mother made." Utah felt as though the ground had slipped away beneath him. "But Tina, can't you leave? Can't we find a way to be together despite this?" She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've tried, Utah. When my parents died, I felt freed from their expectations, but the agreement bound me in ways I didn't understand. Every time I tried to leave, something would happen to remind me of my duty. The deity's hold on me is strong. If I were to leave, who knows what consequences might follow. For me, for the village, for everyone." Utah's heart ached with frustration and sorrow. "This isn't fair, Tina. We shouldn't have to pay for promises made by others. We deserve our chance to be happy." She reached out and touched his cheek, her touch a bittersweet reminder of the love they shared. I know, Utah, but life isn't always fair. We can't always control the paths laid out for us. Sometimes the sacrifices of one generation affect the next. He felt his eyes well up, but he fought back the tears. Tina, there must be a way. There has to be something we can do. She sighed deeply, her fingers brushing away a tear that escaped down her cheek. I wish there was. But for now, all we have is this moment. Utah clenched his fists, feeling a surge of determination. I will not give up on us, Tina. I'll find a way. I'll talk to the elders, the villagers, even the deity if I have to, I promise. Tina smiled sadly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Just be careful, Utah. This is a path filled with peril, but if anyone can do it, I believe it's you. With a renewed purpose and a heavy heart, Utah vowed to fight for their love. He knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainties, but as he held Tina's hand one last time in that cafe, he knew that their love was worth every battle he would face. Utah met with village head, who told him to bring a cow and goat together with some other items for appeasement to the deity. He have him 3 days to fulfill the conditions. Utah quickly went and gathered the items and commenced his journey back to the village on the 3rd day. Midway into the journey, a heavy storm started making all journeys impossible. By morning of the 4th day, all was clear and the journey started. Utah's heart was heavy as he approached the village with the collected items, a cow and a goat, for theasment ritual. The storm that had delayed still echoed in his mind, magnifying his anxiety. He knew time was precious and that he was already on borrowed moments. The next morning, determined and resolute, he set out towards the village, the animals in tow, hoping against hope that it wasn't too. When he finally arrived, he could feel an unsettling tension in the air. Villagers gathered around him, their faces etched with sorrow and resignation. The head chief stood at the forefront, eyes heavy with a mix of regret and stern resolution. "You're too late, Utah," the chief said softly but firmly. "Last night, as you were kept by the storm, Tina was moved across the river to the shrine where she will serve the deity permanently." Utah's heart shattered at the words. "There must be something we can still do," he pleaded, dropping to his knees. "I have the items. Please accept them and help me save her." The chief shook his head. "The window has closed. The customs and the agreement with the deity must be respected. Once the shrine's ritual has begun, it is immutable. To interfere now would bring calamity upon us all." Desperation clawed at Utah's soul as he thought of Tina, her tears, and the life they had dreamed of together. Tears streamed freely down his face. This isn't fair. She shouldn't have to pay for the choices made by others. The chief sighed deeply, his own heart heavy with the weight of ancient traditions. Life often entangles us in the choices of our ancestors. Some burdens are too heavy to break free from. You must learn to accept this, hard as it may be. Utah felt a wave of despair wash over him. He clenched his fists, feeling the sting of his nails digging into his palms, a futile attempt to wake himself from this cruel reality. The truth, however, was unyielding, and his heart ached more profoundly than he had ever thought possible. In his grief, Utah found a quiet resolve. He made his way to the river, stopping at its edge. On the other side, unseen, Tina was beginning her life of service to Chanka in a small, secluded shrine. He knelt by the water, whispering her name, letting his tears merge with the flowing stream. Hours passed as he stayed by the river, his spirit bound by the love he couldn't relinquish. Though he knew the villagers expected him to move on, to forget, he couldn't. Not now. Not ever. Word of his vigil spread through the village, and despite their initial reluctance to aid him further, even the villagers felt a stirring of sympathy. Some brought food and water, others silently offered prayers for the tormented lovers. As days turned to weeks, Utah realized he could never return to the life he had once envisioned. He chose to stay by the river, building a small shelter where he could keep watch, hoping for any sign of Tina, any fleeting moment when he might catch a glimpse of her from across the water. His love for Tina transcended physical barriers and ancient customs. Though they were apart, their hearts remained deeply intertwined. Utah's presence by the river became a poignant reminder to the villagers of the power and endurance of true love, even in the face of insurmountable odds. In time, Utah came to understand that while he couldn't change their fates, he could honor their love by being close, by never forgetting. And somewhere across the river, in her moments of solitude, Tina felt his presence, drawing strength from the enduring connection they shared. In the quiet of her shrine, she whispered her love to the winds, knowing that, in spirit, they were never truly apart.